Taiwan stands at the crossroads of democracy and rising tensions. But not all threats come in the form of missiles or tanks. The island faces a shadowy war waged in the gray zone, a realm where intimidation and influence replace open conflict. Cyberattacks targeting Taiwan's infrastructure, disinformation campaigns sowing division, and relentless military flyovers are just the tip of the iceberg. These strategies aim to wear down Taiwan's resolve without triggering a global response. Picture this. A single manipulated news story spreads like wildfire, shaking public confidence overnight. Or imagine the hum of jets overhead, a daily reminder of the pressure mounting from across the straits. This is the reality for Taiwan, an unending chess game of power and survival. How does a small island navigate these murky waters? Stay tuned as we delve into the tools, tactics, and resilience shaping this modern battlefield. I'm your host, Joey Chou, and this is Beyond the Reefs. Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socio-economic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world, beyond the reefs of this island nation. Not too long ago, Defense Minister Wellington Gu said that Taiwan's military acquisition priorities will center around 4 key areas: asymmetric warfare capabilities, enhancing combat resilience, improving reserve forces, and countering gray zone tactics. What exactly constitutes as gray zone tactics? Today we'll be speaking with Stephen Honeywell, who is a seasoned senior executive and an industry thought leader that's left an incredible mark with his distinguished leadership across the U.S. military, federal government, and commercial sectors for over 18 years. His extensive experience in international strategic influence, global risk, international relations, and information technology innovation has reshaped the landscape of these fields. Mr. Honeywell's proven track records of spearheading initiatives and consultancy roles for prestigious entities, including NATO, the U.S., defense, intelligence, and diplomatic sectors, is a testament to his exceptional capabilities. Last week, Steve arrived in Taiwan on the invitation of both public and private institutions to advise the country on gray zone tactic development. We had a chance to sit down with him and discuss, exactly what gray zone tactics are. Before we start the conversation, I would like to emphasize that Steve is here taking our interviews completely independent of his role as a consultant and as an advisor for whichever entities that has invited him here. So whatever he says here is purely for our curiosity, mainly mine, and not on behalf or representing the viewpoints of any of whichever entities or institutions or sectors that's invited him here. But first off, let's find out more about his background.
I guess you could call me a bit of a global crisis connoisseur. So my career has taken me to some of, we can characterize them as dynamic locations. So from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, some interesting spots. Within that travel, I've had the pleasure of working alongside U.S. military. I myself was part of the U.S. military earlier on in my career, then having the opportunity to work with alongside various government agencies, NATO, having also been in the commercial sector, private equity, venture capital companies that focus on those national security needs. My focus area is strategic influence, fostering open societies, civil resistance. How do you push back against malign influences and those forces that seek to oppress and stifle freedom? And so that's essentially, advising organizations and how to understand all that is going on in this complex ecosystem that is the information environment, and then how do you achieve your objectives through resilience, and then if necessary resistance.
As we've interviewed many on this show, mostly I would say, civilians, right? However, you've had extensive experience working in the U.S. military. So what is the biggest difference between working with those in the commercial sectors, aka CEOs or management teams, as well as politicians or public servants in the U.S. federal government, compared to those who are in the U.S. military?
In a nutshell, working with the military is all about precision. Obviously, a hierarchical structure, right. But they have that can-do spirit, that entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial spirit, where they just adapt on the fly. Mm-hmm. And you saw that not only in some of the innovations brought about in terms of Iraq and Afghanistan, and there was this organization called the Joint IED Defeat Organization, or JIDO, and that brought about some of the simplest but most powerful and effective counter IED initiatives.
I should note here that IEDs are improvised explosive devices, and counter IED efforts involve a comprehensive approach of disarming the threat networks that employ IEDs, also defeating the devices themselves and training others to do so.
In solutions such as, let's strap an ammo can out in front of a Humvee, and that will actually trigger the IED, thus saving the crew inside. That all came from that, that entrepreneurial spirit and that inversion of expertise, if you will. And then that organization being JIDO, helped to harness it and then scale the innovation. So that's one thing that I don't think people truly appreciated about the military. Dating myself here, if you were to look at Iraq and Afghanistan, I want to say it was 1 infantryman to 9 support. Wow. Yes, this is how it was traditionally done. You'd have those quote-unquote combat arms forces, your infantrymen, your field artillery, your special forces. That's looking at it from a very conventional mindset. Mm-hmm. But in today's day and age, where you have hybrid threats, and the cyber domain can be your front line, the cognitive domain can be your front line, but in terms of the hybrid threats, they are also on the front lines. Mm-hmm. Because again, the actions being taken in many of these contexts are not kinetic, quote unquote, so things blowing up. Mm-hmm. Rather, they're non-kinetic, and that is that much more dangerous. These non-kinetic effects, again, being cyber, economic, malign influence.
Okay, so listening to your experience, Steve, having worked in the military and knowing, of course, a lot more than us average Joes, it seems like, especially in the U.S., for every infantry unit or every unit on the ground, there could be potentially upwards of 9, 10 to more supporting units. And I'm sure there's got to be a passage in Sun Tzu's Art of War about knowing thy enemy and winning the war before, or winning the battles before it even starts. Now, my next question is about gray zone tactics. We want to really extrapolate exactly what gray zone tactics are and how they differentiate from the more physical combat that citizens can better put our heads around, and what are the differences in dealing with gray zone tactics versus their physical counterparts.
When we say gray zone, I think that we are doing a disservice because they are threats and it is nefarious activity. So whether those are cyber intrusions, whether that is an attempt to manipulate popular opinion through malign influence. When I say malign influence, that could be misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, so the creation of deepfakes, propagation thereof, or more simply, controlling an algorithm so that your feed persistently feeds you content to sway you in a certain direction. It is also inclusive of economic statecraft. So all of those items, there's also a criminal activity piece to it. So all of those items that are below the threshold of what we would typically call war. Those are quote unquote gray zone activities, and you can see that they're nefarious. So I would very much like to see us label them what they are in terms of nefarious activities or hybrid war. I mean, there are many terms kicking around, but gray zone is definitely my least preferred, but it is one that many understand and accept. So, when you read the paper, you can see some of these gray zone activities outright, whether that is conducting quote unquote exercises in the Taiwan Strait, right, incursions into the ADIZ, but also United Front activity to capture news influencers, to sway the news, and also again going into the economic statecraft piece, sanctioning, placing tariffs. Those all fall into gray zone activities. And to go back to Sun Tzu, the art of winning without fighting. Yeah. So when you look at what a certain country, in this case, would like to see, total capitulation of Taiwan and into a fabricated narrative of Taiwan was a part of a certain country, fabricated narrative. So to realize that fabricated narrative without having to take a true physical action, essentially an annexation like you saw with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So again, that would equate to winning without fighting, and that's where you see all of these activities, and you're seeing them daily.
Okay, while not everyone has the resources or the training to be combat ready for physical combat, that is, some of the gray zone tactics being employed by our potential enemies seem to be more cognitive, as in more or less we can train ourselves to defend against these tactics. Now, Steve, what would you say that for the layman's or the average Joes, what we can do to help us better prepare for protecting ourselves from gray zone tactics?
This is really about building that resilience so that the people can choose for themselves to protect that freedom either way, to not escalate, to protect and build that resilience so that they have their own agency to choose. So, when we look at like an advanced cognitive warfare campaign and what you could actually do about that in layman's terms. So advanced would be controlling the totality of the information supply chain. So that's from the device that you even purchase. So by making that selection, you could be opening yourself up to risk. So if it's a certain device that's owned by or whose company is within a certain nation state or nation states that don't respect certain data privacy and protection issues, that's step one, where they're establishing control of that supply chain, and then they can feed via that device. But also your interaction with that device, you are giving them information into your patterns of life so they can tailor that information to you. So you would likely see a subtle shift in your information environment. Maybe your favorite news or websites start pushing a slightly different narrative, or your social feeds are filled with divisive content, whereas they previously were not. Then the tempo would increase. So that's for the individual, and then broader would be, potential cyberattacks, attacks on critical infrastructure, with the ultimate goal, the strategic goal, to sow confusion, a distrust in authorities, and then ultimately to disrupt that society. So what can a citizen do Be critical of what you consume in terms of information. Double check those sensational headlines, because this is about trying to evoke an emotional response. And I mean, there have been multiple double-blind studies that show individuals, just by the nature of the headline, if it evokes an emotional response, more often than not anger, they will just share. So don't share from unreliable sources, and don't increase that network effect. And most importantly, stay informed about the threats and how to recognize, because it truly is a civic duty at this point in the digital age to do so.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things. One of them is about spreading disinformation. Taiwan actually has laws instituted to punish those who spread disinformation, either with intent or unknowingly doing so, which encourages the public to fact check before we spread information online or via words of mouth. Now, I am curious, now that you've been in Taiwan for a few days, you've been in meetings with the public and private sectors, people who seek out your advice on how to defend ourselves against cyber attacks and gray zone activities. What do you think of Taiwan's capabilities as of now against gray zone activities?
Novel, and even just seeing how it is parsed out between the different agencies. So you have Ministry of Digital Affairs that looks at some of it. Some of it is the Ministry of Interior, but overarching, it's definitely trending in the positive, in that for the entities that I've engaged with, and this is across from public and private, just the mere fact that you've recognized the importance of building resilience to malign influence and strengthening public awareness is a positive. This is very much a challenge of staying ahead of the curve, because the tactics used in this are constantly evolving. So again, the fact that you've identified, step one, identify the problem. And then there is a lot of promise in the various civil defense organizations and initiatives out there, because you have that network effect. So those organizations, they can be the one, through their participants, to identify in real time and push back in real time in a way that, something centrally managed or in a capital, they couldn't want to identify in a timely enough manner, or even if they did, to develop and deploy a proper countermeasure where those organic, credible elements, they can. So they can be the one, and also they're the trusted agent within that community. They could be the one to say, to someone who's elderly, like, oh no, that's actually fake news, and push back on it if they did share it on the same platform, and actually have that, real-time engagement and interaction. So there's definitely a lot of promise in those movements. And here, you see a little bit in Sweden. You definitely see it some in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, some of those organic elements in the psychological resilience and defense. So it's definitely, as I said, trending positive.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve. It has certainly been enlightening to be able to speak with you on gray zone tactics, how Taiwan is doing. Thank you for visiting Taiwan. Will you return anytime soon? Did you enjoy your stay here?
I would like to obviously, come back and visit. Taiwan is beautiful, as it was aptly named given the name Formosa by the Portuguese, meaning beautiful. Yeah. So, with that being the draw, I would definitely like to come back and visit.